If your city gets rallied or swarmed in Rise of Kingdoms, there's a very good chance the garrison that you think is best is actually the wrong one for the situation, because the best commander pair for surviving a swarm is completely different from the best pair for defending against a rally, and even your formation should change depending on what's hitting you. So today I'm breaking down exactly how to prepare your city, which are the best commander pairs for every city garrison situation, and which formation to use for each one, so if somebody decides to hit your city, you're actually ready. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I'm a partner creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you want more Rise of Kingdoms content, drop a like on this video. This topic was highly requested from you guys when I made my recent Garrison guide, so if you missed that video and you want a guide for flags, fortresses, and passes, check that video out. But the one thing you guys mentioned in the comments was that you wanted to know more about city garrisons, and so I have to give the people what they want. So that's where this video comes from. You guys asked for it, and if you appreciate that, subscribe down below. And with that being said, let's jump right in here. Before we jump into commander pairs and formations and everything like that, I want to give you guys some tips before any of the attacks even start, so that way you're actually prepared, and then you can decide what the best commander pairs are going to be given this situation. Okay, and the first thing that we have to touch on, and this goes above anything else, if you are watching this video to learn how to protect your city, there is only one answer. There's literally a single one best answer when it comes to protecting your city, and that is the peace shield. This is the only actual way to protect your city in Rise of Kingdoms, besides just not being on a map where people can hit you. Okay, of course, in KvK you want to make sure that you're in the correct alliance and on that alliance's territory, but even then territory can be burned when you're offline, and so the number one way to protect your city is a peace shield. Okay, this is the de facto best thing you can do. This is better than any garrison, any anti-swarm situation, any formation. There's nothing better than this. Okay, so if you want to protect your city, use a peace shield. Now the next question is, should I use a peace shield or should I take the rally and swarm and maybe trade positive there? And the answer depends on, well, mainly your account, but also your risk tolerance. And I will say, if you're a free-to-play player or a low spender, and especially if you are under 100 million power, there is a high probability that you should just not take it. Don't take the swarm, don't take the rally, just use a peace shield, teleport away, get yourself out of the situation. That is the correct play. Okay, nobody will blame you for not taking the rally, not taking the swarm. You must always do what is in the best interest of your account, and I'm telling you right now at the beginning of this video, because this is the most important point. Okay, if you're under 100 million power, you probably shouldn't take the swarm or rally or anything like that unless you know exactly what you're doing and you've built commanders and formations specifically for that situation, because otherwise you could be in big trouble. Okay, use the peace shield, use the peace shield. Hey, use the peace shield. Okay, with the most important tip out of the way, let's jump into some other tips here that are very, very critical. The first thing, of course, is make sure that your hospital is completely empty if you are going to take a rally or you expect to be swarmed at some point in the near future. Keep your hospitals clear. The next thing that you have to do is take a look at the troops that you actually have in your city. One thing that you'll notice is, for me, I actually have a lot of tier 1 units, and when we look at your hospital capacity, this hospital capacity does not change depending on the tier of unit, right? So this level 25 hospital can fit almost 100,000 units, and it doesn't matter if they're tier 1 units, tier 4 units, tier 5 units, whatever the case might be. And the reason that this matters is because you don't want to waste your hospital capacity on lower tier units. Okay, it is most critical that you protect your tier 5 units above all else. So if you take deads, you'd rather the deads be the lower tier units, because those are cheaper to retrain. They don't really matter on the battlefield. You're not using tier 1 siege to fight, right? So it doesn't really make much of a difference. So one little trick that you can do to effectively remove those troops from your city is, first of all, you could just stuff them in like a nearby flag or fortress or something like that. If you're on alliance territory, you should be close to a flag. Ideally, you would be like right on top of it so you can jump immediately into into that flag. The other thing that you can do, which might actually be a little bit faster, is you can look at in your zone and you can find a barbarian fort, and you can go ahead and click rally and start an 8-hour rally and actually set a preset which includes all of the tier 1 units or low tier units in your city, and you can initiate the rally against that barb fort. And there's a couple of tricks you can do. Obviously for me, I'm not using a troop expansion, so if I were using a troop expansion, I'd be able to put even more units into this rally. And of course, the reason that I'm using Frederick with Julius Caesar is because they also have the troop capacity skills on their kit here. If you don't have these legendaries expertise, you could use a commander like Epic Scipio. So I'm talking about literally like Purple Scipio is a commander that everybody will probably have expertise. He also gives you 10% troop capacity. Okay, so look for those leadership commanders specifically that have the bonus troop capacity and use them for this specific rally, so you can get the most number of troops possible into this rally, and that means out of your city. Now, how do I know these troops are out of your city? Well, if we click March here, okay, you'll see that these troops actually end up in an army on the sidebar. And what we can see is if we click on the troop details in our city, the number of troops in our city is actually lower than the number of troops or total number of troops. And in fact, if we click on the map, you'll see that actually all of my siege, especially the tier 1 siege, are considered on the map while they're part of this rally initiation. Okay, and so again, this is faster than dumping them into a flag or anything nearby. You just start a rally. Ideally you have this preset before you go into your KVK fighting zone or whatever the case is, and that's going to save you the headache of scrambling last minute trying to get those troops out of your city. So now they're just sitting there, they're going to wait for 8 hours. Okay, we set up an 8-hour rally, and they're just going to sit there safely outside of your city. They weren't going to do anything anyway, right? I mean, they're siege, it doesn't matter. They weren't going to help you defend your city in any way. And the reason that we pick a barbarian fort is because rallying or initiating a rally against a barb fort does not give you war frenzy. For those of you that don't know, I'm sure you know this, but in case you're a beginner to Rise of Kingdoms, war frenzy is triggered upon scouting, rallying, or attacking an enemy, or even targeting an enemy, but you can't use a peace shield for 15 minutes. And remember, that's the #1 way to defend your city. Okay, so if you initiate a rally against an enemy flag or fort or whatever, you're going to trigger war frenzy, and now you're screwed. Okay, so that's why we use the barb forts. Hopefully you guys understand the purpose behind that. The next tip I want to give you guys is that if you look at your wall here in your city, you actually have different slots that you can customize in advance. So you can set different types of garrisons if you want, and you can kind of bump them up depending on the situation you find yourself in, right? So as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video, the best garrison for anti-swarm might not be the best garrison against the specific rally that is coming to your city, right? So if you're planning on just taking a rally, well, there's a specific commander pair you might use, and if you're anticipating getting swarmed, there's a specific commander pair you might use, and so you can set that up in advance on your wall. Okay, now the #1 slot is going to be the one that the game defaults to as long as those commanders are in your city. If one of those commanders is out of your city, then the game will default to slot #2, and then it checks, are those commanders in the city? If they're not, it defaults to #3, and I'm sure you guys can understand the logic behind that. Okay, what I would recommend is the #1 slot should be your very best anti-swarm garrison. Okay, and we're going to talk about that later in the video, but the reason for that is because when you get swarmed, a lot of times you may not even be expecting it, right? Perhaps you teleported onto coalition territory and you thought you were safe, but there was actually an enemy that random TP'd right next to you, and they're 190 million power, and they just start swarming you down, right? And you thought you were safe because you were far from the front line, but you actually weren't. Again, another reminder, always be on alliance territory, even if that means quitting alliance and joining the one that you're on now. I know it's annoying, but it can save you a big headache. But that being said, accidents happen, and what you want is the best anti-swarm garrison to be #1. Everything after that should be the garrisons that are good for specific types of rallies or the troops that are in your city. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later, but some players might have more cavalry units than anything else, and so they want a cav garrison. Some players might have more infantry units than anything else, they want an infantry garrison. I think that makes a lot of sense to you guys, right? So the rally specific garrisons should fall in the following slots, because when it comes to a rally gets initiated, right? You get warned, hey, a rally is coming, and you've got some time to sort of adjust what's on your wall, right? Whereas with a swarm, you might just get hit. If you just boom, there you go, you're getting swarmed and you don't have time to react, right? And so you want the #1 thing here to be your anti-swarm garrison. The next tip I want to give you guys is another sort of tip that involves preparing in advance. And what I mean by that is making sure that if you have a specific set of gear that you want to use on your wall for anti-swarm or whatever, in many cases for players it's simply going to be your best gear, right? You're just going to want to use that depending on the commanders that you have. So if you're using like a Charles Martel on your wall, then you want your best infantry gear, right? But either way, the equipment that you decide that you want to use in those situations should be saved as a preset in your loadouts, and it should be labeled city defense, right? So that way in the heat of battle, in the moment, you don't have to think about, oh, what gear should I be using, and you're scrambling and you're panicking, right? You just know, okay, I thought about this in advance, this is the gear I should use, it's already on a preset, you slap it on. In the same vein as that is setting up your talents and your talent presets for the different scenarios you might find yourself in. Okay, now you might be saying, well, Omniarch, how do I know what talents to use if I don't know what commanders to use? I'm going to talk about commanders in just a minute, okay, but I'm just giving you the idea, like, okay, when I figure out which commanders are best for me, make sure you have a few different talent builds set up depending on the situation, right? So as you can see here, this is my Gorgo talent build currently, and this is for city anti-swarm, okay? And you'll see a couple of different talents here that I specifically picked for Gorgo, and just to be clear, these are the same talents that Charles Martel has. So if you're a free-to-play player and you only have Martel, you can do that. But some of the talents here might not be the ones that you expect if you watch my most recent Garrison video, right? In particular, talents such as Nowhere to Turn, it says if this commander is serving as a city garrison commander, whenever you're hit with a basic attack, you gain 6 extra rage, right? So this only works in cities, and frankly, if I'm being honest, I know that this is built for anti-swarm. Honestly, you probably don't even need this for anti-swarm, because when you're being swarmed down by 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 armies, you're going to be generating a ton of rage anyway, and so you probably don't even need this talent, okay? But I'm using this as an example of a talent that only works in your city, and so this might be a talent you would pick over some of the talent builds we discussed in my recent Garrison video, okay? Now, if we take a look at Know Thy Enemy, this talent is again specifically for city garrison, but it says your garrison takes 9% less damage when surrounded. Now, this is an extremely good talent, and if you are anticipating a swarm, this is the #1 best talent to grab in the garrison tree, okay? 9% less damage is one of the best talents you can get in any situation. That is all damage, okay? And the only requirement is that you're surrounded. So even if there's one rally and one extra army hitting you, then you're surrounded, and it turns this on. So again, the default commander setup on your wall should be for anti-swarm, and that would involve something like Know Thy Enemy. Other talents that I've grabbed here are things like Call of the Pack. This gives you extra defense under 50%, and by the way, this is not just infantry defense, this is defense for all troop types, and that's what is in your city most likely, okay? Most players don't exclusively have one troop type, they've got troops of all different types. Same thing with Double-Headed Axe. This is normal damage, not for infantry, but for every troop type in your city, okay? So perhaps this isn't the best specific talent build for anti-swarm. Like I said, things like Undying Fury, you might not need as much because you'll be in a situation where you're generating tons of rage when swarmed anyway. So perhaps you could consider taking away some of the rage generation here and this extra point, and you could grab Testudo Formation. But even still, even if you're being swarmed, I think this talent build would be totally fine either way. The point I'm trying to make here is that you want to make sure that you have a specific talent build saved here, so that way you can switch to it if, especially if you're a garrison player, and let's say you're typically using a specific talent build, but now you're switching to city garrison, you want to have that already set up before you start getting hit. And the last tip I want to give you guys before we talk about commander pairings and formations and everything like that is that you want to make sure before you get swarmed or rallied or anything like that, I guess a swarm you can't really plan for as much, but you want to make sure that you have every single stat point available to you in those situations. So what I mean by that is coming up here to your commander view and setting constable as your primary, and then setting Iron Guard as your secondary. That's on your city wall, right? Getting every stat point possible, making sure that you ask for Duke or General or some other war title that you can get or that your alliance can spare for you, so that way you have the maximum number of stats available as well. Make sure that if you're in a KVK where you have support skills, right, you want to make sure that you're equipping support skills to that garrison that you're using. In the same vein as that, like I said earlier, when you do launch that 8-hour rally to get troops out of your city, perhaps you're able to use a support skill that gives you even more troop capacity, right? And so you want to play around with that to make sure that you can have all of the support skills in the best places possible possible to maximize the outcome of this. In the same vein as that, you want to grab a rune, right? You want the 7/7 rune, or perhaps a 10% health rune if you can grab that instead. Don't forget about your 24-hour 10% defense item that you can use here in the VIP shop, or maybe you have some on your account from other places. You probably have that already if you're in a fight with somebody, like if you're actually fighting in KvK, but even still, just double check. Go to the Lyceum of Wisdom, grab the newspaper. Maybe you have some extra stats here like archer defense 1%. That's going to help. Make sure you change your city skin to something that would make the most sense for the garrison that you're running. So again, if your city is mostly infantry, maybe you want an infantry skin. If it's archers and you have a archer skill damage garrison, maybe you want Twilight Falls. Obviously you want to prioritize health or perhaps a defense as well. I know a lot of people right now actually have the 8% troop defense skin here, the Hawa Mahal. This is fantastic, of course, because it's tanky stats and it's for all troop types, which is fantastic. So this is a great one too. But all of these sources of stats are things that you have to take into consideration before you take a rally, or ideally you already have set up in case you get swarmed. Now, one last thing I want to mention before we talk about commander pairs and formations is that when you set your 8-hour rally, like I mentioned before, on the barbarian fort, you have to make sure to cancel it if you want to teleport away. Okay, and that sounds like it's easy, and it is, but in the heat of the moment you may only have seconds before you start getting hit again, and once your city is actively getting hit, you can no longer teleport. So make sure, if you're planning on TPing away with a random teleport or something like that after a rally ends, make sure you cancel the fort rally first, and then you can start spamming the random TP button. With those important tips out of the way, let's talk about commander pairs. And the first thing that we have to do in order to discuss that is we have to look at the troops in our city. What you have to realize is that most likely you're going to have mixed troops in your city. Now, it may be lopsided towards a specific troop type, right? So here, for example, I have more tier 5 infantry than anything else, but ultimately this is a very mixed garrison, right? All the troops in your city are going to be used for this defense. And so any sort of idea of like, okay, I'm going to build an infantry garrison or a cavalry garrison, that might work for some players who are very heavy in that troop type, but for a majority of you, you have a mixed garrison, right? I mean, that is just the nature of the game. And so you probably want a mixed troop garrison for most situations. And the first one that we're going to talk about is actually a full leadership garrison. And that should be no surprise, because the benefit of leadership commanders is that they affect all troop types, right? The stats that you get are for every unit type. It doesn't matter what they are. And so they have an advantage here when it comes to defending your city. And in particular, there are two commanders, perhaps three, that we have to talk about. The first one is Hera, and the second one is Matthias. Now, of these two, I would prefer the Hera as primary because he has the defense tree, whereas Matthias has the attack tree. Don't really love that as much for a garrison situation, but even still, the Hera with Matthias is extremely good for anti-swarm situations and just defending your city in general. Now, Hera has a really interesting circular AoE and a mighty shield, and shielding is really quite good for garrisoning your city because unlike healing, which can fill your hospital faster, shielding is just mitigating damage and preventing you from taking damage during those turns, and so you end up being quite tanky in those situations. You also gain 30% health here, and when you're serving as a garrison, you have a chance to get 40%, if you're a city garrison, counterattack damage for 3 seconds. Extremely good, right? Counterattack damage is going to absolutely demolish anybody that is trying to swarm your city down. 40% is insane. The third skill gives you 20% more skill damage, and when you use an active skill, you gain another mighty shield of 500 when garrisoned in your city on top of the 1200 that you're getting from the active skill. The fourth skill says if you're serving as a garrison commander, you gain 15% attack, 15% defense, and when you have a shield and you're hit with a basic attack, there's a chance of dealing 1,000 damage factor to the attacker. And then the expertise says if you have 3 different troop types, you take 20% less normal damage. That is insanely good for a city garrison. So Hera has some counterattack damage. He has stats for all troop types. He has shielding, which we love to see. He has circular AoE, so he's hitting everybody around him, and he's dealing instant proc damage to things that are swarming you as well with this, which is quite good. On top of that, when you pair him with Matthias, we have another circular AoE here. This is 2400 to 5 nearby enemies, so much stronger damage here. And if this is a city garrison, you take 10% less damage for the next 3 seconds. And like I said before, if you're getting swarmed down, you're going to be casting your active skills quite fast because of that rage regeneration, which means you're going to have the 10% all damage taken reduction up for a majority of the time. On top of that, you gain 40% of stats, 15% attack defense, and 10% health. And then you get a 10% counterattack damage bonus if it's mixed troops, which it will be. So right there, we've got some nice synergy with the counterattack on Hera. On top of that, at 70% rage, you take 25% less skill damage for 4 seconds. And if you're garrisoning your city, you gain another mighty shield here with a factor of 800. Okay, so again, another shield that we have that will cause procs of the damage on Hera. And again, mighty shields stack with one another, so we're getting tons of shielding between these two commanders. The fourth skill says you deal 5% more damage if you're a city garrison, and when you're hit with a basic attack, you have a 15% chance to cast your active skill again, which is absolutely diabolical. Again, this gives you that less damage that you take, and it's circular AoE. And then when you expertise him, that skill just gets better. Okay, you take 10% less damage and a 20% chance with a 10-second cooldown instead of 15. All in all, I would say this commander pairing for your city is the very best anti-swarm garrison that you can have, as long as you actually have both of these commanders expertised, right? And that is a huge caveat. Most players do not have both these commanders. Even if you've got Hera, you probably don't have Matthias, because Hera was a commander that like leans towards city garrison but works in regular garrisons, whereas Matthias certainly does not work in regular garrisons. So most players do not have him. But I wanted to start here because if we're talking about what is the best anti-swarm garrison, this is probably the answer if you've got a nice distribution of troops across all of the different troop types. When it comes to the best formation here, I would say Tertio is certainly the answer, and that's because it says when garrisoned in your city, all unit specific attribute bonuses from the user's armaments will apply to all unit types. Okay, which is insanely good for your city, because like I said, you're going to have troops of all different types. So if you have an armament that gives you 3% attack for infantry, when you've got Tertio formation, that actually is 3% attack for infantry, cavalry, archer, and siege. And so it just multiplies all of your stats by 3 or 4, depending on, you know, if you have those siege in your city or not, which is insanely good. And then on top of that, when you look at the inscriptions for Tertio, these are just diabolical for your city. I mean, 15% boost to counterattack damage, insane. Same thing with Vigilant. This is in the scroll slot. Fortified gives you 12.5% skill damage, smite damage, and combo damage resistance. That's multiplicative. Insane stuff here. Same thing Resolute, that's 5%. Choke point and Precautious just reduces the damage that you take if you're swarmed. And then things like Steelheart and Ironsides are just more damage resistance. Okay, 7% damage resistance, that is all damage, and it's resistance, which again is multiplicative instead of reduction. Okay, there's a difference there. I made a whole video about that a while ago, but either way, this is clearly the best formation to use in this situation. Unfortunately though, and I know what you guys are already saying, Omniarch, nobody has Tertio formation. Okay, and that is true. So we will talk more about other formations in general, but again, if I wanted to just start off the pairing section with the best anti-swarm thing that you could do possible, it's probably the Hera with Matthias with Tertio formation. That's the way to go. Okay, now should anybody be building this? No. Should anybody be getting Tertio formation? No. But the answer to the best anti-swarm mixed troop city garrison is that. The runner up here, I would say, would be something like a Lapu Lapu primary with the Matthias secondary, and this unfortunately doesn't have the defense tree, it has the skill tree, but the Lapu Lapu is more so just damage oriented rather than counterattack and shielding oriented like we saw with Hera. Okay, so active skill, again, it's a 5 target circular AoE, 2400, and if there's a rallied army, it takes extra damage. Second skill, 20% attack and 10% skill damage to rallies. It's okay, it's not great. Third skill gives you 10% defense, 10% health if you have 3 troop types, which you will in your city, and if you're serving as garrison, you take 5% less damage. If it's your own city, it's increased to 10%. But the fourth skill is where this really starts to get interesting with Matthias, because it says whenever this commander's troop uses an active skill, if this commander is serving as one of your city garrison commanders, your garrison gains a 20% bonus to damage dealt for 3 seconds. That is all damage, and there is no cooldown. So with Matthias, you have a chance to just cast your active skill again with a 10-second cooldown. So not only are you going to be casting your active skills a ton, but now you're going to be getting a 20% all damage bonus on top of that for a majority of the battle. And then the expertise here is also quite good because this enhances the active skill. It bumps up the damage to a rallied army, but then on top of that it says if it's your city garrison, the current target is also disarmed for 1 second. For the next 3 seconds, this commander troop also takes 10% less skill damage. Okay, so again, no cooldown here. So as you're casting your active skills over and over and over again, you're constantly disarming the target there, and disarms basically prevent the enemy from launching basic attacks, which reduces the damage you take obviously, but also they don't gain any rage for that turn from those basic attacks. Also, all the things that could trigger off basic attacks don't happen that turn, so it's deceptively good. You might think, oh, it's just one basic attack, right? 1 second, who cares? But if this happens over and over and over again, not only are you reducing damage, you're reducing the procs of things that they have, you're reducing their rage engine, right? So lots to love about that disarm. And so while the stats here aren't anything insane and the damage factor for 2026 meta is frankly kind of low, it's 2000, there's still a lot to love here with the Lapu Lapu with Matthias. So that is another mixed troop army that you could go with. Again, this is not as anti-swarm as the Hero with Matthias, but it is definitely built for mixed troops and is something that you could run if you've got the Lapu Lapu already with the Matthias. You can still run that, it's still fine. Okay, now with the leadership and mixed garrisons out of the way, let's talk about garrisons that people might actually have, okay? Because a lot of players, they're not going to have the Matthias, okay? They're simply not. I get that he might be a mightiest governor commander that you're just getting if nobody wants him, so maybe you've been collecting him or whatever, but most people don't have the Matthias or the Lapu Lapu or whatever. So what are some other choices that we have here that we can use in certain situations? Well, one of the fan favorite commanders is Charles Martel, and the reason for this is because 1, he's got a shield, 2, his active skill is an all damage bonus for 4 seconds, which is very long, and you got to remember that if you're getting swarmed, you're going to have this up often because your skill cycle is going to be very fast, especially if you pair him with Gorgo, which we'll talk about in a second. But a quick skill cycle paired with 30% all damage for 4 seconds, you're going to have this up for a majority of the fight. You also have a ton of tanky stats for infantry. Your city garrison gains 10% attack here. Watchtower, nobody cares about that, it dies immediately. Then the 4th skill is the cream of the crop, 30% more counterattack damage, is diabolical. And then on top of that, he has a museum relic, which gives you an insane amount of infantry attack and a little bit of health here as well. And so Charles Martel as a gold key legendary commander is insanely good, even as like 5515 or 5115 even, honestly, because this 4th skill and the active skill are what are going to do a majority of the heavy lifting, especially if you have a mixed troop garrison, which you probably will for your city. Now, the reason that I mentioned Gorgo is because the active skill here has a 900 rage requirement, which again, if you're being swarmed down, not only are you gaining rage faster, but now the requirement to cast is lower, right? It's 10% lower. And so those active skills fire off over and over and over again, which not only are you getting the benefit of Gorgo's active skill, 10% more normal damage and 10% counterattack damage, as well as 20% less skill damage and a single target smite shot, you're also going to get that 30% all damage bonus over and over and over again, right? So very good stuff here. This pair works especially well if your city has a ton of infantry in it. So if you have noticeably more infantry than anything else, the Gorgo Martel might actually be the play for you, because the rest of the stats here for Gorgo are exclusively to infantry, unfortunately, but she does have some other really nice tricks up her sleeve in the form of 10% chance to make the target take more normal damage, right? So that is not troop specific, that's just a debuff to the target. And so if you're getting hit by a rally, perhaps now you have your allies swarm it down once it's debuffed. That works really well. And then the expertise here is deceptively good, because when you fall below 50% units remaining, whenever you launch a basic or counterattack, you have a chance to gain a mighty shield and debuff the enemy's attack by 30% for 3 seconds with a 5-second cooldown. You also have a chance for more normal damage here, 5-second cooldown on the 4th skill for 3 seconds. So all in all, the Gorgo Martel city garrison is devastating, especially if you have a ton of infantry in your city more than anything else. For this, you probably want to run either the arch formation or the pincer formation. You're probably, like I said, not going to have tertio, right? Most people don't have tertio. So if your best set is pincer, go ahead, use pincer. If you've got the arch formation set up, then okay, boom, go ahead and use arch formation. This is just more normal damage. It works really well. Of course, if you do do have the Hera, you can start to swap him into that secondary slot if you want to lean away from just infantry. Hera has some of the benefits of Martel in that you have a ton of counterattack damage. Now it's not all the time, which is why Martel is so devastating, but he does still have that bonus while having stats for all troop types, right? 30% health for everybody is very, very nice, especially in a city garrison. So you could do the Gorgo with Hera. You could even do the Martel with Hera if you don't have the Gorgo, right? Or if you've got none of those commanders, which I'm sure many of you watching are saying like, man, you keep talking about like these leadership commanders, we don't have those. You keep talking about these older garrison commanders like Gorgo, who it's like kind of crazy to think like, oh, she's an old garrison, but I mean, she's from 2023. Gorgo's almost 3 years old, right? And so most people should not be investing in Gorgo right now, especially not for a city garrison. So okay, let's say you don't have any of these older garrison commanders. Okay, what would you do as like a fully free to play player? Well, you could do something like Martel with YSG. This is a tried and true, really old garrison pair that you could do. Charles Martel works here for the same reasons we talked about. He's got the garrison infantry and defense trees. He's got the counterattack damage, the all damage, the shield, and some extra stats for your city garrison. And then the Seong-Gye is just a circular AoE. Just if you're getting swarmed, everything gets hit with that circular AoE. He's got a rage engine here as well, and a huge bonus to archer attack. You also gain another 10% attack for your city garrison, and his relic gives you some stats for your archers as well. Okay, so certainly not the best city garrison that you could do, but for two older commanders that many players have on their account to a certain extent, this could work really, really well for you, or at least the best that you can do in that situation. In this scenario, you're gonna have to just use the formation that gives you the best stats. Obviously Tertio would be best, but you probably don't have that, so you're going to be looking at something like arch formation probably, because there's no skill damage on Martel, or you might have to use wedge formation if you just have nothing else. It is what it is. Obviously if you got some hollow square, you could try that out, but ideally you would want to do arch formation most likely for this garrison. Another commander I want to highlight here is Choi Young, who also on the expertise has a tremendous amount of counterattack damage. So if you are an archer garrison player, the Choi Young is probably one of your best bets, especially because if you are a player who has Choi Young, you probably have more archers than anything in your city, or at least at the start of KVK you will. But he has some healing on his kit. He has a ton of tanky stats here for archers. You take 20% less normal damage as well, which is very good. And so there's a lot to love about the Choi Young, and you can pair him with a couple of different options depending on if you're doing anti-swarm or anti-rally. Again, if you've got the Hera, if you've got the Matthias, you could slap them as secondary there, or you can even pair him with somebody like Hector. Now I want to take a moment to talk about Hector as a city garrison commander, because he's actually not that bad, especially if you're only going up against a rally. Now you look at Hector and you think, okay, he's a versatility commander, but he has been used in mixed garrisons for quite a while at this point, and he has his pros and he has his cons there as a mixed garrison commander. But again, if you're defending your city against just one rally and there's no swarmers, you actually have a really compelling argument to use Hector there, because he deals single target damage, which is all you really care about, and his kit sort of adapts to the damage type that you care about, right? So that's where it comes down to, you know, the formation is actually really forgiving with Hector, whereas it's not as forgiving with other commanders, right? So just like we were talking about with the Martel with YSG, it's like, okay, well, what formation do you use if you don't have Tertio? Like wedge kind of sucks, arch isn't great for YSG, so like what do you do there? The benefit of Hector is that not only does he have universal stats, but his damage type actually changes as well, right? And so if you have him as an infantry garrison, well, you can use pincer, but if you have him as a combo garrison, you can use him with delta, and if you have him with an archer garrison, you can use him with wedge, right? And so the formation is flexible, not just the troop type, which is the huge advantage that Hector has there. So in the case of, like I was just saying before, Choi Young with Hector, you actually have a huge single target skill damage hit, and then for the next 3 seconds enemy troops deal less damage and lose 15 rage per second. You also get universal 10% health, 30% defense for all troop types. You take 5% less normal damage, and when attacking a troop on the map, which rallies are on the map, in an archer garrison it says whenever this troop inflicts a debuff on an enemy, you take 5% less damage for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 2 times. Great news, Choi Young gives you debuffs on the 4th skill here, so there's a little bit of synergy there as well. So you're debuffing them with both commanders, and so you get the benefit of this often. And then with the 4th skill for either leadership or for for archers, every second you have a 50% chance to gain a 30% bonus to skill damage for 5 seconds, not as applicable with the Choi Young. And then the expertise, of course, is when you have a mixed garrison, you take 10% less smite, combo, and skill damage, which is very tanky for your city. Okay, so you could do the Choi Young with the Hector. That's another sort of anti-rally situation rather than anti-swarm, and that's certainly not where the Hector pairings end, right? So that was for a majority archer city. Let's say you have a majority, I don't know, infantry city, then okay, well, we can talk about Gorgo again, right? You could do the Gorgo with Hector against just a rally. Again, we're not talking about anti-swarm, just against a rally, and now all of a sudden you can use pincer formation and you're both dealing single target smite damage to the enemy. You've got all of the stats work for not only universal for Hector, but some of the stats work for your infantry for Gorgo. And so again, all of the same benefits of the Choi Young garrison, like I said, with the flexibility of Hector, now he flexes to infantry and he's a smite damage commander, right? And we really like to see that. In the case of cavalry, you could even do something like David with Hector, right? David is a very strong cavalry garrison, and with Hector, now you get some universal stats there as well, right? So this is where, you know, if you're building anti-rally situations, Hector actually works really well, whereas if you're building anti-swarm situations, you would rather do something like Hera or Matthias or something like that. Okay, so now that we've talked about a bunch of different commander pairs that you might use depending on what you have on your account and what scenario you find yourself in, whether it's rally or a swarm scenario, and also depending on what troops you have left, right? If you have a ton of cavalry or a ton of archers or a ton of infantry, there's a lot of different options depending on your account. And hopefully you guys can understand why I can't just sit here and say here's the best garrison, right? Because it depends on the situation. That's kind of why I started with the Hera with Matthias, because it's like technically that with Tertio is probably the best garrison, but a lot of people don't have it, so you kind of have to adapt to what you have in the situation you find yourself in. But now let's talk about a couple of commanders that we didn't discuss and why I didn't discuss them, because there might be some questions about these commanders in the comments below, and so I kind of want to get ahead of that. If you have questions about other commanders not in this video, comment them down below as well. The first one is Richard. I think a lot of people see Richard as an early game garrison commander, and he's got the defense tree, and they think that this is a commander you should use on your wall. The answer is certainly not, and the reason is because one, he heals a lot of your troops, which brings them back to the fight, which is nice, but if you're losing the trade, then you're actually just going to fill your hospital faster. And not only is there healing here, but sort of the bigger problem with Richard isn't just the healing, it's the fact that he's reviving those troops without using them to deal damage. Okay, so unlike somebody like Martel, who has the big all damage bonus and the counterattack damage bonus and all that stuff, Richard has none of that. It's a debuff to the enemy, and then his second skill is 10% counterattack damage. It's not nothing, but it's not crazy. Further damage taken reduction. The third skill is only infantry stats. The fourth skill increases your healing, reduces damage taken to your watchtower. Your watchtower dies in the first like 5 or 6 turns of any rally anyway, so that's literally, this skill is totally useless. And then the fourth skill is 5% less damage. So Richard is a ton of damage taken reduction and healing, but no damage dealt, right? And so you're healing and tanking, but those troops are losing the trade, so you're just filling your hospital super fast. So Richard is definitely not somebody that you want on your wall. The next commander we have to talk about is Ragnar. Now, the reason that this might come up as a garrison is because a few weeks ago I made a video talking about how surprisingly good he is in a flag or fortress behind Choi Young. Okay, if you guys missed that video, check it out on the channel. But this commander, Gold Key Ragnar, okay, not Ragnar Prime, but Gold Key Ragnar, is shockingly good in an anti-swarm garrison behind Choi Young, and the reason for that is because he has a 40% all damage bonus and 20% all damage taken reduction for 5 seconds on the active skill. Okay, now when you pair that with the fact that when you're swarmed you generate rage really fast, you almost always have this up, which is insane. On top of that, you have 20% attack, that is for all troop types, and then we move over to the museum relic and it gets even better, because with the Ragnar you get the extra, what is it, 35% total defense for all troop types and a 20% normal damage taken reduction. So that works against the, obviously every turn white numbers normal attacks, but also against smite damage, combo damage, things like that. So you have 55% universal stats for all troop types, a ton of all damage, and a ton of damage taken reduction. This is extremely good in an anti-swarm situation. Now, the reason that it's something you could try on your wall in a swarm situation, but why I didn't necessarily jump to that conclusion in this video is because the one thing that makes the Choyong Ragnar absolutely pop off in those Imperium KVKs where this garrison is used often is because that garrison is constantly being filled. It is constantly being reinforced, and if it sits near 100% the whole time, you are absolutely punishing the individual armies that aren't being reinforced, right? I mean, like, regular armies can't be reinforced, and so inevitably they die off. And now there's more armies that replace them, but you're trading really well against those, you know, low health marches, and that's what does really well. When you have the Ragnar on your city garrison, you are not getting reinforcements, right? So it actually might do really well at first, but then after a while your troop count is going to drop dramatically, and in that case a lot of your skills aren't doing anything. Okay, so in this situation, could you try the Choyong Ragnar in a swarm? Probably, and it might trade pretty well, but I do want to just quickly make that distinction as to why it's different than a flag or fort. Your city has finite troops and you're not getting reinforcements most likely unless your allies are helping you or whatever, but that's why I didn't talk about the Ragnar in the garrison there as a free-to-play option. And if you have him maxed out somehow as free-to-play, you could try it, right? Just know that the active skill is weaker if you're free-to-play who has like maybe 5511. Okay, but if you got nothing else, like certainly you could try maybe a Charles Martel with Ragnar or something like that. But all in all, I think the Ragnar is exciting in the very specific situation behind Choyong, and mainly when the garrison is kept full. Another commander that you may expect me to have talked about but I didn't is actually Attila, right? We see Attila in a lot of garrisons in the current meta, and the reason that you don't really see him as a city garrison commander, which you can, right? You could use him as city garrison, but Attila works really well as a troop specific garrison in a lot of instances, right? So whether it's Attila with David or in a artifact KVK, you find Attila with an infantry garrison, for example, or with Choyong or whatever the case might be, right? The benefit of Attila is that he has tremendous damage, raw damage on the active skill. The second skill does nothing in a garrison. The third skill is troop specific stats. So yes, you take a little bit less skill damage, but you have a ton of cavalry attack, and this flexes in an artifact KVK to 40% infantry attack or 40% archer attack, right? But in a city garrison, what you don't want is just stats for one troop type, most likely, unless, like I said earlier, your city is almost entirely cavalry. Okay, then you might want to think about the Attila David, right? But beyond that, the fourth skill says if this commander troop contains only cavalry units, then you gain a bonus to damage dealt. Now again, in artifact KVKs, this can change to only infantry or only archers, but in a city situation you will never only have one troop type. So the Attila garrison is literally the meta for flags and forts, but that doesn't translate as well to your city because again, there's only stats for one troop type. The fourth skill does nothing, the second skill does nothing, the expertise remains very good, right? So we like that, but I mean, we're talking about a little bit of benefit on the third skill. Active skill is great, expertise is good, it's just missing some of that punch that it has in flags and fortresses, and so he probably will not perform as well as you would expect on your city wall. Okay, now if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I'm going to share with you a commander pair that actually could be a bit devastating depending on the situation, and this is a hyper specific commander pair for one particular type of player. If you're a mega whale and you've got tons of garrison commanders to choose from, specifically leadership and cavalry, this might be the pair that you leave on your wall just for fun, and here's why. This pair would be none other than Matthias with Eleanor. Okay, now the reason that you pick this commander pairing to leave as the default on your wall is because if you're sitting next to a flag on perhaps coalition territory instead of alliance territory, well, you might be in a situation where enemy players may accidentally tap your city. They're trying to go towards the flag, they're trying to maybe walk around the flag to prevent reinforcements, whatever the case might be, they're just spamming right click. Sometimes it happens where an enemy will accidentally right click your city and they might accidentally hit your city for just a second. Okay, just a second. And in that situation, there is a best commander pairing, and that is Matthias and Eleanor. And the reason that this pair is so insanely broken for those battles that only happen for a few seconds is because both of these commanders have instant proc skill shots. Okay, not instant proc damage, instant proc skill shots, which is insane. So again, let's look at Matthias' expertise. When your garrison is hit with a basic attack, you have a 20% chance to cast your active skill, which deals 2400 damage to up to 5 nearby enemies. If someone just randomly hits your city, there's a 1 in 5 chance that you're just gonna boom cast your active skill on everybody nearby. That's devastating. But on top of that, Eleanor's third skill does the same thing. If this commander serving as a garrison commander, whenever the garrison is hit with a basic attack, you have a 15% chance to use the active skill. The active skill is 2300 damage to whoever's hitting you out of the gate. Just boom. Okay, so again, nearly a 1 in 5 chance that somebody who accidentally taps your city just gets smacked with a 2300 nuke from the entire army in your city. It's actually insane. But beyond that, both of these commanders deal skill damage, and so you could slap wedge 2 on there and you don't even need a special formation or tertio or whatever. You just maximize skill damage dealt, and now all of a sudden you have an absolute demon on your wall for people who accidentally tap your city for a few seconds, and all of a sudden they took 2 active skills and they only hit you for 3 seconds, and they're just like, what just happened? How did I take all these dead troops? Right? So this is the secret garrison that you could use to sort of bait people to hit you, or if you're in a situation where you might accidentally get hit, you run this garrison and you will just troll your enemy with how many deads that they get by accidentally hitting your city. But again, this is only for those players who already have these commanders. They're already maxed out and they can really use this to their advantage. Otherwise, the default city garrison you should have should be your very best anti-swarm garrison. All right, guys, with that being said, this video was way longer than I thought it would be, but hopefully I covered everything that you wanted to know about city defense and city garrisons. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave a thumbs up on it. It really helps out the channel a ton, and comment down below your thoughts on the commander pairs we talked about. Are there commander pairs that you prefer? Let me know in the comment section below, and while you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel as well. We are so close to 100,000 subscribers. We actually just hit 98k, so consider subscribing down below and just double check to see if you're subscribed. You might think you are, but you're actually not. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.